You've all read the title, that's why you've clicked on the video. We're going to go into the history of Israel. Currently, we're starting smack bang in the middle of it, where Iran has a nuclear program. They won't give it up. Why won't they give it up? Why does America have to disarm them? Why did they have to bomb them? You know, we're starting in the middle here. We have to go back to the very start. And the start is that Israel declares independence in 1948, and they declare that out of the mandate of Palestine. The entire region was British territory after World War I ended. In the early 20th century, Turkey's empire was split up between the French, the British. The French got Lebanon and Syria, and the British got Israel and Jordan. And so the area that would become the modern state of Israel and Palestine and Jordan was called the Mandate of Palestine. You had modern Israel and Transjordan, now what we call Jordan, both under the control of the British Empire. The Zionists had the Jewish people moving there throughout the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. The early Zionist movement that wanted to fill up Palestine with Jews, ultimately, they wanted Jordan too. Some of them, they were called revolutionist Zionists. But all the early Zionists wanted the Jews to settle in the land of Israel. And in order to get the Jews to settle there, they terrorized them. They created the anti-Semitic hoaxes in Europe. They created the anti-Semitic hoaxes in Iraq, in the border, the Middle East, trying to convince the world jury that the only place that they would be safe is in the country of their own, in Israel, and to go and stake out this project where they were building farms and kibbutzes and cities. And they were going to populate the state of Israel and create their own nation after World War II. And we're skipping ahead a little bit. 1948, they declare independence and they start massacring Palestinians. They start killing Palestinians, driving them from their land. They try to take as much as possible, and a coalition of every Middle Eastern country declares war on them. None of the Middle Eastern countries accept them as a state, except for Turkey, but Turkey is an Arab. At that time, Turkey was secular, and Turkey arguably is not really part of the Middle East. Turkey recognizes them right away, but Egypt and Syria, being the big players at the time, declare war on Israel. So does Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. They all declare war on Israel. They go all in and they fight to a stalemate. The United States implements a ceasefire, so do some of the other players. But while there's a ceasefire in Israel, American Jews inside the United States and in Europe are smuggling weapons to Israel. You see, after World War II, only the United States had the atomic bomb. But in terms of arms races, you have the light arms trafficking like machine guns and things like that, ammunition. And the American Jewish gangsters, American Jewish businessmen and other Jews in Europe, they're trafficking weapons to this young state of Israel to build up their military capacity. This is where the arms race starts. You see how these things are parallel. In 1948, there's an Arab-Israel war. It's the first of its kind. It's fought to a stalemate. There's a ceasefire. During that ceasefire, you have beginnings of an arms race, which in the US, smugglers, Jewish smugglers, businessmen, gangsters, even politicians, they're smuggling light arms from World War II into Israel to help them defeat Egypt and Syria. And eventually they roll them back. In 1956, there's another Arab-Israel war. The president of Egypt, Nasser, he takes over the country. He's a nationalist. He's against the British occupation and colonization of Egypt. He nationalizes the Suez Canal, which is the all-important waterway and connects the Mediterranean to the Arab Sea. So Nasser, the president of Egypt, nationalizes the Suez. The British and the French want the Suez Canal back under their control, but the United States doesn't want them to intervene. And they don't want to piss off the United States. So they work with Israel to fabricate a false pretext for Israel to invade Egypt and seize control of the Suez from the Egyptians. The Israelis claim that Egypt was preparing for war and they were harassing them in the Gulf of Tehran. Among other things, there was a military build-up in Egypt. So Israel, with the support of the British and the French, invades Egypt to take control of the Suez Canal. The United States comes under Dwight Eisenhower, and at that time the United States regime is trying to have a balanced approach towards the Arabs in Israel. Eisenhower comes in 56 and says Israel has to leave and the war has to stop. So Eisenhower overrules the British and the French and forces Israel out of Egypt. And for 10 years, things are reasonably quiet. Israel and the Arab coalitions in the meantime. However, in the mid-1950s, Israel's president, David Ben-Gurion, becomes obsessed with acquiring a nuclear weapon. By the 1950s, other countries have nuclearized. The United States has an atomic bomb and a hydrogen bomb. The Soviet Union tests weapons in 1949. The French and the British get a nuclear bomb, and so, in the 1950s, Israel's leader, Ben-Gurion, becomes obsessed with the nuclear bomb. He says the only way that Israel will ever be safe amidst the threat of Egypt and Syria, this Arab coalition against them, he says the only way that they will be safe is if they acquire a nuclear weapon. And so Israel begins collaborating with the French in the late 1950s to develop a nuclear reactor at Dimona, out in eastern Israel. When Dwight Eisenhower leaves office in 1961, he warns JFK, the incoming president, that Israel is acquiring a nuclear bomb, and warns Jack Kennedy about this. There's a meeting during the presidential transition between the election and the inauguration, and JFK asks, "What do I need to know about?" They say Israel was pushing a nuclear bomb from 1961 until 1963. JFK is on top of the Israel Prime Minister demanding, inspections of their nuclear reactor. The same situation that's playing out with Iran right now, because Israel does not yet have a nuclear device. They want a reactor, but they're working towards a bomb, and the United States knows it. So JFK is coming to the Israeli Prime Minister and saying repeatedly, you need to open up the reactor to the US inspections. We need to see them twice a year. They need to be comprehensive. You need to let our scientists in, and we need to see what you're doing. And Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister, is giving them the runaround. He lets in the inspectors, but they're literally building fake walls to hide what they're doing. They build a fake facility and walk the inspectors through it, literally with drawn on fake knobs and switches and everything. Finally, in the middle of 1963, in May and June of 1963, JFK sends a letter to Ben-Gurion and says, "Listen, I've had enough of your shit." And at this time, this is a tense situation. Ben-Gurion is calling JFK a boy. He doesn't respect him. He's the youngest president to be elected, and it's a very tense relationship. JFK won't invite Ben-Gurion to the White House. So, instead they meet in New York City. They won't have an official state visit. Finally, JFK puts his foot down. Now, this is in May and June of 1963. He says, "Listen, we will completely isolate Israel. You can no longer count on our support if you don't open up your reactor to the US-led inspections twice a year." The Israeli government receives a letter. The next day, Ben-Gurion resigns, allegedly without reading it. Now, obviously, he read it and then resigned, so that he could avoid answering the ultimatum. Now, to this day, we don't know why he resigned. He never gave a reason. He was the prime minister from 1948, when Israel was declared, until 1963. He was the first prime minister of Israel after Israel declared independence. And then, except for a little part in the mid-1950s for about a year, he was their prime minister uninterrupted again from then until 1963. When he resigned that day after he got the letter with no explanation, and to that day he died, never explaining why he resigned. This is the founding father of Israel. JFK sends a letter to Ben-Gurion's successor in July and says the same thing. "Look, I told your predecessor, Ben-Gurion, I need these inspections or else we're cutting you off." This guy smiles on him. But of course, in November 63, JFK is assassinated. His assassin is assassinated by Jack Ruby, otherwise known as Jack Rubenstein, who was connected to the Jewish mafia. Guys like Mickey Cohen, who were running guns to Israel in 1948 during the Arab-Israeli War. Why did Jack Ruby kill Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, he says, "I did it for my people." In January 1964, Lyndon Johnson is the president. Israel is to believe to have tested their nuclear weapon 2 months after JFK was killed, according to the American intelligence. The earliest timetable that Israel could have acquired the nuclear weapon was in January 1964, just months after JFK was killed. This is when they went nuclear. After Lyndon Johnson becomes president, the amount of foreign aid to Israel triples from US support, and previously where foreign aid to Israel was almost all humanitarian and economic aid. Now it's 3 times as big, and it's all weapons. It's missiles, it's advanced weaponry, it's tanks, it's all military equipment. And suddenly, the American administration is all in favor of Israel. There is no balance at all. In 1967, Israel launches a surprise attack on Egypt and Syria. Israel pushes and finds that Egypt's air force is completely vulnerable. They're able to sneak onto one of Egypt's airfields and find out that they're totally deaf, dumb and blind. They won't see it coming. So in 1967, Israel starts the Six-Day War, another Arab-Israeli war. Israel launches a surprise attack on Egypt's air force and then Syria's air force. Egypt invades the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula, which is, I don't have a map in front of me, but Egypt invades the Sinai Peninsula. They invade the Golan Heights in Syria. They actually go all the way up to Damascus, and they're shelling Damascus. But they create a ceasefire line in the Golan, and they take back the West Bank. And so Israel controls that whole area. They control everything from the Golan, inside North Syria, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and they control all of the Sinai Peninsula. Israel, it's at its peak. During this campaign, there's an American radar ship, a reconnaissance ship off the coast of Israel, the USS Liberty. The reconnaissance ship was there to keep an eye on the evolving military situation in the build-up of the Six-Day War. Israel believes that if that reconnaissance ship is there, it will detect Israeli troop movements that are moving towards Egypt, and it might blow the element of surprise. The United States knows the full extent of their military activities, so Israel launches an all-out attack on the USS Liberty off the coast of Israel. They shoot the ship, they bomb the lifeboats, they see the American flag flying on it, and they attack anyway. Later, they claim it was a case of mistaken identity. They say they thought it was an Egyptian ship and they shot it down on accident. But it would have been impossible for them to think it was an Egyptian ship. It was waving a giant flag. They shot the lifeboats. It was radioed to them. This was an American ship. They sunk it anyway. They tried to kill everybody on board because they did not want the US government to know what they were doing in Egypt. Do you know who was part of the cover-up? Who headed the investigation on behalf of the Navy a few months later? John McCain. John McCain Sr. headed up the order into Israel's attack on the Liberty. This is in 1967. That's the Six-Day War. 6 years later, in 1973, Egypt has been humiliated. Syria has been humiliated. These are two military powers in the region thought to be on par with Israel. They're seeking revenge for what Israel did. And so the president in Egypt, Anwar Sadat, comes up with a plan. They're going to do a surprise attack on Israel, and they collaborate with Syria to do it. On October 6, 1973, during Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria launch an attack on Israel from both sides. Egypt lands on the west bank of the Sinai Peninsula and moves to take the Sinai from the Israelis. Syria invades from the north and they take back the Golan Heights near the Sea of the Galilee. Israel, caught totally off guard, about 12 hours before the attack, they begin mobilizing reservists. But it's too little, it's too late. They appear to be overrun. Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, calls up President Nixon and the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and says, "You need to bail us out."
And so this is going to be a 3-part series. If you're enjoying it so far, hit subscribe, turn on notifications. Later on in this week, we're going to have some Australian matters to go through, some Senate stuff. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button as well. Until then,